The Oxford English Dictionary suggests that the contemporary definition of the word aporia, which is used for confusion, is a very tarnished misuse of a better word that once meant the feeling of being at sea momentarily in where to begin discussing or engaging in an ongoing critique of a complex reality in which you actually do have mastery of the subject. It's not so much confusion as looking for a point of departure. As difficult as it is to accept the idea that the situation that we're in towards the end of the summer of 2022 was planned, I think it's something that has to be considered in light of some developments that I've unearthed in academic research. You might say that I'm unused to being believed, but at the same time, I find it difficult to see why I'm disbelieved because the material that I'm about to present is, to put it charitably, very credible and seems to be what really happened. One of the questions that comes to mind is, if I'm right about all of this, where is the opposition? And maybe you're watching me for the first time and you're thinking, opposition to what? Aren't you starting at a very awkward place? Well, opposition to the situation that we find ourselves in and the premises that went into the accomplishment, if that's what you want to call it, of our dire situation by powerful people who claim they had no foresight. Maybe they really did have foresight. Maybe they've been pushing us into this. So, where is the opposition? Well, in the 1950s, America had a Red Scare. What that meant was there were rumors that people were communists in the State Department in Washington, D.C. It was a libelous hysteria, a carryover from the terroristic days of lynch parties and mob scenes, and encouraged by the same sort of crowd. But one of the people who was intimidated enough to cancel an interview with Paul Robeson was Eleanor Roosevelt. We also know that Marilyn Monroe, probably from the way she was being used in Police Gazette, which was a society of the sort that surrounded Jack Ruby in the Dallas Police Department. Marilyn Monroe was getting nervous. She was scared. She was edgy. She could see some of the shadowy outlines of something accumulating in the shadows that made her more than a little bit superstitious about what Hollywood might really be thinking and planning to do. Behind this era was an argument about the nature of reality. Adolf Hitler said that it was just man's lot to be at war. Russian realism basically believed that the absolute expendability of man to the state purposes. America was depicted by Noam Chomsky as having something close to Hans Morgenthal's idea that no matter how bitter the truth might be, you keep the ideal shining. So, what passes for Russian realism is American cynicism. And somehow we ended up in a situation of a double cross representing a role reversal. It came to be symbolized very dramatically by Ingrid Bergman, who came into this country from Nazi Germany to make movies, as did Douglas Sirk. These people from German cinema infiltrated and bonded with the Red Scare apparatus, who reasserted their power after World War II, much the same way as D.W. Griffith helped the defeated reassert their power after the Civil War through his racist film Birth of a Nation. And D.W. Griffith was indeed meeting with Italian fascists from the Futurism movement in the 1920s and 30s. Marinetti, Luigi Freddi, filmmakers associated with the Cuban movement. Cubist movement. They called themselves futurists in Italy. In other parts of Europe, the Cubists, like Picasso, was working with Prokofiev and the fourth dimensional psychologist, P.D. Ouspensky. And of course, everybody knew, because his career was in high gear, about Houdini. Houdini is the essence of what they did in their role reversal. And of course, Charlie Chaplin was putting out silent movies, and he put out a film called The Great Dictator. A Chaplin-esque image emerged in Japanese cinema in my research that began to tip the scales in terms of investigating a super story that was encrypted behind the scenes in these Axis film turnaround systems. The role reversal that Hollywood had in store with the help of Hitler Germany's cinema. Ingrid Bergman played a friend of mine, Martha Gellhorn, in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Martha Gellhorn had lived with Eleanor Roosevelt in the White House, but unlike Eleanor, she was not intimidated by the Red Scare. She was infuriated by it and refused to come back. The symbol of the resistance in Casablanca is a double cross. So the outlines of super story that was being called Lazarus, or Back from the Dead, which was integrated into such tellings about Central America, where Reagan had illegal mercenary armies by Frederick Graham, calling a man they knew as Hitler, who was in their chaplain corps, suddenly wanted to be called Lazarus because he was back from the dead. We see the symbols of Lazarus coming back from the dead as Hitler incarnate, only friendly, in the symbol of the name Casper, Reagan's Defense Department secretary, the name of a man who brutally attacked me blindside as a little boy. In these images, Reagan is seen with Errol Flynn, who was famous for saying something that John Lennon copycatted. He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. He lived in Laurel Canyon with Houdini. So we begin to see the outlines of the super story that took shape while Reagan was in office and the AIDS attack happened, which we were forbidden to discuss, except in terms of slapping five at the barber shop with the band the Monkees or the Zappas or whatever. But what began to happen was a PlayStation hybrid Zania erupted, and we began to be treated to Yojimbo forces, which means fake feuds. One central invisible power, a Lazarus, a Houdini, a Ouspensky from the fourth dimension, was hitting both sides, this side then the other, this side then the other, and capitalizing on the victims as a way of life, as a way of life. And this was poaching as a way of life. And it was run by none other than, it turns out, John Lennon, who staged a double, a fantasy of stepping out with the help of the network of Donald Trump and Pink Floyd, who put on The Walrus. Pink Floyd's The Walrus was the story of a man who was unrequited and considered a coward. They had implanted a neuroplasm to the tune of King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. Began stalking me with neurosurgeons while ripping off the museums in Pittsburgh, terrorizing me for my life. They murdered several Kennedys. So what you see is the people who played Schizoid Man for me, Watton makers. His name is indexed in the War College to Attenborough and Schwarzenegger, where Greta Thunberg emerged. Had a copy of the Roto of the Pittsburgh Press, which had a clown with the name Crary, me, on the cover, on display in their house. Back in the days when I was attacked blindside by this man named Casper. And the same gang continued to follow me through the stages of the development of the war crime syndicate that they developed. Now, I came in somewhat late in the game. I was born in 1960. So I was only 7 or 8 years old in Prague Spring, 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed and Bobby Kennedy was killed. And then the Beatles put out the White Album with Revolution Number 9 about what they had done, with foreshadows of what they planned to do yet. And of course, what they were doing was partially an argument about the character of people who were different than them. They had a book they put out called A Question of Character about JFK, which depicted him as being seedy, a fact that harks back to his father, Joe Kennedy's Hollywood romance with the starlet Gloria Swanson. And it was from this crowd that emerged Joan Crawford, who was with Richard Nixon in Dallas the day they poached JFK. And the fact that Douglas Sirk came from Nazi Germany but moved into America because of his Jewish wife gave him cover with the help of a woman. Women and their treachery play a major role throughout this presentation by the forces of the Axis, largely instigated and in place at the stage mastery of Trump, Yoko Ono, and the New York Kremlinopolis, generally speaking. Several of the people who did this didn't know what they were doing. A man came into Dunkin' Donuts once when I was in the presence of Will Zell, who lured me to Mount Desert Island from the Gurdjieff Society of the Ouspensky Center, wearing a hat that said, "My job's so secret, even I don't know what it is." Obviously, that's how they paid me for a sucker. And it's also the way they pretended to be playing Reagan, who knew all about it. And of course, I would like to believe that Yoko Ono is using Greta. I would like to believe that. But she's initialed for George Takei. Star Trek took a great leap forward in the Hearts and Minds program with NASA spy intelligence and this PlayStation idea. But Takei was more than just Nancy Reagan's friend through the AIDS attack. He was a friend of John Wayne's. In the Berserk film, The Green Berets, which opens with a Marine singing in German, since it was part of the Axis revenge, that's appropriate enough. We went into Vietnam to defend the Vichy French, who were allies of France, Burma, and Japan, because France with Vichy France, an ally of Adolf Hitler. So the photograph that exists of John Wayne with Lee Harvey Oswald, whose job was so secret, he didn't know what it was. Clearly, John Wayne knew what his job was going to be when Edwin Walker set him up. Edwin Walker was arrested after the University of Mississippi uprising against JFK for leading the racist riot and threatening to kill JFK. And then, miraculously, he became the star witness for the Warren Commission. Who killed JFK? The Warren Commission killed JFK. And Dan Rather continues to pull strings with his buddies, Stephen King and George Takei, basically daring anybody to penetrate the veil of John Lennon's double fantasy and get to the bottom of something that's been going on since the days when they made Casablanca. So when you look at Houdini, you're talking about the era of Einstein's special theory of relativity. The fourth dimensional psychologist, P.D. Ouspensky, was one of the people, along with Blythe Sanders and Henry Bergson, who saw the contraption of film in two dimensions as representation of a three-dimensional reality, and thought, aha, we can have a hidden Ouspensky fourth dimension high command of Houdini leapfrog oligarchs operating behind the scenes in three-dimensional reality in a way that's analogous to the two-dimensional reality of cinema. And they began doing things as extreme as building skyscrapers. So you have Trump Tower, but you no longer have the World Trade Center. Why? Because on 9/11, the anthrax day, Di Gullis and her friends, like Cliff Robertson, went to New York to announce another major victory for the Axis revenge situation. What they've done with Putin is to unify by division. They've divided us up in Ukraine and forced us to choose ideological sides or stand back and let the pros show, as they used to say. And unifying by division, what they've done is simply moved us on. There's more important things now. We have to save the world, they say. Well, we do, I think, have to think about these issues very carefully. And it's a tragedy that the people who have done this still hold sway and hold domain. But we don't dare let them take away from us the human history of the matter and the questions. We don't dare let them Houdini the questions. We need to explain that Hollywood had a social program. The social program that so scared Marilyn Monroe had to do with arguments about the inside of the character. Blythe Sanders and Henry Bergson foreshadowed the idea with metaphors about biological entities in cinema, because apparently one of the things that the ecclesiastics really didn't like was the idea of being able to capture and reproduce fornication in the form of adult cinema, so-called pornography. So they wanted to have a whole panorama already designed for chronological purposes in a biological plan of ecclesiastical education. I know personally from the Gurdjieff Society how deeply they resent being called entertainment. They don't think it's entertainment. And you have Lavrov and like Pavlov. It's a symbiotic rhyme scheme of sorts about a pitchfork that they have in the road. You've heard the shadow knows what evil lurks in the heart of man. So we have a, a script about the Crossroads Church and protection of virginity. And polemic about human rights and so-called overpopulation. In America, different from Russia, where the expendability is an absolute, we try to believe in the ideal of human rights. Chomsky says it's like a Hans Morgenthau illusion. We have an idealism despite abrogating the ideal ourselves. So, by what work ethic do we arrive at support for the Rohingya, who are stateless and simply want a place where they can raise their children and go to school? And all of this is said by Gail Burstyn's script to have already been written, already discussed, already come to an understanding. As Roger Waters, one of the perpetrators, one of the true heapists of all of this, who just slept on his lounge chairs, made in the shade through the Reagan era, would say, "Welcome to the machine." Well, I'm not gig with this. What you're faced with is somebody who opposes this business. I don't think that the idea that in the 30s, King Edward, a friend of Adolf Hitler, came prancing to Wall Street and said the Church of England must control Hollywood is dissociated from the fourth dimensional idea of escaping Hitler and escaping Lenin and putting them together in the fourth dimension Casper, the friendly ghost. I don't see it as separate from the ecclesiastics of Hollywood saying this is not an entertainment, because I believe they're droll enough to see the whole thing as deadly serious. Ben Nicholson has a fourth dimensional image, and it seems to tumble. It's a cubist image, and yet it rises bolt upright. And when you put together the ideas of, it's like a Morgenthau idea. No matter how it falls, it remains consistent. No matter how you put together the issues that are in the vicinity, it comes to arrive at the same thing, which is that these catastrophic, greedy people decided there were too many of us. And it's just legitimate that Elon Musk stands up for human procreation. 444 days was a symbolic idea, metaphor for a metaphor for a metaphor. When they held the hostages in Iran, Michael Foucault, who Chomsky called one of the most immoral people he's ever met, met with the Ayatollah. What they were setting up was suicide missions of people like Foucault and Sean Straub. Sean Straub was premising the outcome on an argument about distribution rights. One of the things that's happened to the opposition, we're not allowed to speak or distribute our views. If I got on the street with this text and leaflet people, I will almost certainly be arrested by the attaché of the whole thing. Robert Elise of Sin, Inslee, the Innocent Slayer, the Kilmore dude, Dare You to Kill Me. And Jay Inslee, dude, whatever, And they say that it's like a war game based on baseball. 3 strikes and you're out. And they fire attack prostitutes at you to get the job done. And the National Security Council obsession of Ronald Reagan pulled it off, and then Chomsky and Trump tears it all up and throws his confetti. Ha ha ha. So that's where they stand. And while I was trying to get help from Flip, he was, pulling the good old Israeli backblade, and he appears on 60 Minutes with Colin Powell. Now, what is that? It was Elton John's chocolate cake at the double fantasy disappearing act of the Houdini. Because we got let them eat chocolate cake. Yes, we got the Obama presidency. So what we see is a whole plot that came from um, the Italian futurists who conspired with the fourth dimensional psychologists. And this crowd has been after me since I was a child. There was a Billy Club. Billy Flynn, Billy Beck, and Billy Rod were all faster than me, and Flynn Construction is one of the gangsters that was working with John Schulman, who chased me out of the city of Pittsburgh. And what happened after World War II was that the defeated turned to the weak to create new alliances. Wouldn't you like to be stronger? So UW Dialectical came and said to the black man, Psst, Weasler really wanted to help you. He's Casper now. He's seen the light. One of the people who was very concerned about what was happening, who was being stalked by Pepperland, by Dr. Pepper, was Martin Luther King. Like Marilyn Monroe, Martin Luther King had the shadow of concern about him as to what was going on in the nefarious background of some of these um, glittering and hostile people who were claiming that their materialism was also a form of spirituality. And of course, that's where it stands with the Republican Party. But you have to understand some of the things I was up against was like the Jewish Holocaust survivor Kazetnik, who John Schulman steered me towards. He was a Holocaust survivor community with unbelievably horrible memories that he couldn't articulate when he could see them. So they knew what they were doing to my mind when they put me through 2 Holocaust simulation experiments. And they called it bursting because it was like a role reversal of the enemy within. Bursting was from The Exorcist. Edna Ray Galuli changed her name to Linda Bursting. It's like through the looking glass. This is not really entertainment. So you have Schulman putting on display a book of Ionesco insulting the audience, autographed by a Krim Madani, which is like a Crimson Midori. They encrypt things in this way. Mondale looks like Mandela, that sort of thing. So you have a situation of symbolism that traces back to Nabucco's stupid code of what boys should do and girls should do. That's what it says in the Burston script, Gail Carolyn Burston. Nabucco was the star of the film Children of Hiroshima. And they're pushing this idea that without morality, you will have war. So what you want to do is get married first. Thursday is the day 2 because you wed first. That's Nabucco and her stupid code about what boys should do and girls should do. The images of Babylon that D.W. Griffith used goes back to the 16th, 17th century apocalyptic images of Muncha and Desiderio. And aligned with D.W. Griffith, who was put in charge of Radio Free Europe by Alan Dulles, who met with Adolf Hitler from the Schroeder Bank to forgive his campaign debts before World War II got started, and then got himself set up to sit on the Warren Commission when the Warren Commission killed JFK in a role reversal situation again. So D.W. Griffith was the biblicist in charge of Radio Free Europe, not D.W. Griffith. Cecil B. DeMille is who was put in charge of Radio Free Europe, but he was also a biblicist at the point. These people were using cinema and pornography for a biblical presentation, which is why the Russian Orthodox Church is so gung-ho for fulfillment. Eisenstein Eisenstein was Eisenstadt was the name of the Trump um, speechwriter from Schulman's gang who followed me to Pitt News. I meant Sergei Eisenstein, the filmmaker, and Wolfgang Stout, who made The Enemy is Among Us after World War II, which has certain iconography of the plan to come. I mean, Oswald was back in the USSR with the KGB, among other things. So this was like sort of a curtain call from the intelligence services. And they set on me with the bizarre idea of the Zappas, that there was some sort of Herculean duty and karma wheel. They used names like Wheeler and Evangelia Karmas for Avenging Angel of Karmas, and put together, used Clemente's name, Roberto Clemente's name, and the Rosa Oberhonnet of the Green Party, ARC. You know, they put stamped Donoghue on my father's obituary and the German Green Party, all this stuff about injecting parochial values. So when a Vietnamese girl came to me at the honors department to come and says the world has meaning because we give it meaning, what they were saying was, you know, it doesn't have meaning to be discovered. It has meaning to be imposed, and we're subordinate to the wise elves who do this. You know, and again, I am in opposition to it. But one of the things that, um, you know, you have like Camila Bolivia, who fell at the the Beijing 2022 Olympics and took fourth place, as a symbol of the fourth dimensional instruction system that was at work when they put this stuff together. And you know, you have Pussy Riot, Pussy Riot, Pu Tin Man, Putin, the Tin Man, oil. He wants Rosa, he wants the Virgin, he wants the oil Virginia and stuff. And this military operation attacked me like the kids at Sandy Hook, Sandy Gutendorf. I mean, Dee Dee Mancini was encrypted for. It's unbelievable they could get this far with a cold-blooded military act against children. But what they did was they used the Svengaliism of rock music, and the curtain call came from people like Tamo de Jong, who believes, as Professor Alexander Dugan believes, that people are symbols and that are more important. It's sort of a Hans Morgenthau compromise. You know, the ideal endures. They're archetypes. We stand for those things symbolically. It's the spiritualism behind the materialism of the intimidation program of the power structure that exists. And, you know, so when you look at the details, you know, like Rondi Tag was my first music instructor when they were putting out the song of Rodney Toady. Well, it's like Ron Dog Tag, D Tag. You know, so they questioning the legitimacy of civil rights and human rights is sort of a bond when the TV, Terry Virgin's Carrot What's Up Rabbit stuff. I mean, Disney was a major factor in the promotion of Adolf Hitler. Don't be surprised if it comes out someday that Walt Disney was one of the people who actually discovered Adolf Hitler and promoted him. These kinds of things that go on in media and fascism behind the scenes. All I'm saying is it's jeopardizing society not to be aware of them, and I'm in opposition to them. How to deal with theories of redress in the world at large when it comes to the gargantuan megalopolin complex of the threnody of inappropriate industries and the terrible war machine. We need allies, but what the standard that they're putting up is one of like Clinton to Fort Tongery. Say this, but do this. Say this, but do this. And it's hard to find allies who have any common sense. it's a very sad situation for the human race that we live in. But as sad as it is, I think it was planned. I think that the futurists saw the sweep of it in cinema and how they could conjure it as a spiritual identity of the religious moral of the human race and so on. You know, sort of span of Paul Roberson's life from the birth of the nation to the death of the world, at least in a metaphor system, and say this is a caution to humanity. People need to get to the bottom of it. We can continue discussing the issues. I have no problem with discussing the issues. I want to see a change over to the echo schools. I want to see a conversation taken up about driving and some responsible building of ramps to high grounds around the world where there's flooding and stuff. I think we need to have a way out of the military industrial complex into a more unified United Nations field of vision for development and stop all of the hatred, reprisals, and materialistic craziness that has led us to um, this terrible situation that we're in, where everywhere there's a division, we see as a metaphor for our duty to rise as warriors. I mean, I don't think, they call this presentation of theirs um, a code of honor. But how could something as amoral and dishonorable as a military mission targeting elementary school children be construed that way? It's not intelligent thinking to say that you think highly and well of someone like the Corals, who were mired in this nightmare, and Roger Waters. Opposed is what I'm saying. I'm opposed. You know, um, I don't harbor any hatred or malicious intent towards people. I'm opposed to this.